All right, let's look at the second process of making urine, and that is tubular reabsorption. And this is very important because, as I mentioned, the glomerular filtration, we're going to move small dissolved substances through the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule. All right, but most of that stuff we want to get back because water can move through there, sodium ions, potassium ions, chloride ions, glucose, amino acids, lots of stuff that we want to keep in our body and not end up as urine. All right, so this next process right here is tubular reabsorption, and that's where we're going to take a lot of those substances and move them back into the blood. So tubular reabsorption is a process that transports substances out of the renal tubule and into the peritubular capillaries. So I don't have a lot of pictures I want to show on this, all right? So let's look at how substances are reabsorbed, and some are through passive mechanisms. So passive tubular reabsorption, so this is showing us over here. So, so that's without ATP. So here we're looking at diffusion and facilitated diffusion and osmosis. Ions can also move along electrochemical gradient. So if we move some positive ions, some negative ions will follow along for free. Next is secondary active transport. So that's going to use ATP. So here we're using ATP to move substances back into the blood. So here we're using that sodium ion pump. This is to get glucose and amino acids, lactate, vitamins, and most positive ions. There's a limit to this though, what is known as transport maximum. So here only a certain number, so we only have a certain number of carrier proteins for each specific substance. The exception to that is sodium. We seem to have a lot of these sodium ions pumps. All right, so let's take a look at specific substances. So first are amino acids. All amino acids are reabsorbed, put back into our blood. Next is glucose. All glucose is reabsorbed. The exception of this is when we have diabetes, somebody has diabetes mellitus. So in diabetes mellitus, you have a very high level of glucose in your blood, which means you have a very high level of glucose in your filtrate. And you overload your transport maximum, meaning you have more glucose in the tubule than you can reabsorb back into the blood. Now, because of that, that leads to more water in the tubule, which leads to more higher urine volumes, which is known as diuresis. And this leads to polyuria, which is excessive urination. All right. Probably the most important on this is sodium. So that's the most abundant cation that's found in the filtrate. All right. And so what happens here is we pump sodium across back into the blood. And by pumping sodium on there, it creates a strong electrochemical gradient. All right, and so negatively charged ions like chloride ions and phosphide ions and bicarbonate are going to follow the sodium ion passively. All right, and by pumping in, so we pump sodium, these negative ions follow along for free. And so once we do that, then water is going to move due to osmosis. And we get that water for free as well. All right. So this can be aided by these things called aquaporins, and these were pores for water. So the proximal convoluted tubule is full of aquaporins, and so that aquaporins are only opened in the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct by antidiuretic hormone. So other substances can follow by diffusion. Let's look at some non-reabsorbed substances. There's three reasons why they could be non-reabsorbed. One is that they're too large. They can't move through these membranes back into the blood. One is they're not lipid soluble, so they can't move through those membranes as well because of that. Or three is that they lack carriers, so there's something we're not actively moving back. All right? So when we look at some of these things, these end up being metabolic waste. So the first is creatinine, and this is not reabsorbed at all and is a metabolite of creatine phosphate. Next is urea. Urea is a metabolite of amino acids. And about 50% of that diffuses back, and that's just because it is lipid soluble. And lastly here is uric acid, and this is a metabolite of nucleic acids. In fact, 90% of uric acid is reabsorbed back into our blood because uric acid can serve a function for us, but too much uric acid can be bad. This is one of those situations where some is good, more is bad, because uric acid can accumulate in our joints, and that leads to gouty arthritis or gout. So let's take a look at specific areas of the renal tubule. So when we look at the proximal convoluted tubule here at the beginning, this is our most active reabsorber. So it reabsorbs all the glucose, lactate, amino acids, and 65% of the sodium and water. All right. So calcium and phosphates are hormonally controlled in this area. If we look at the loop of Henle here, and we look at the descending limb, so over here is the descending limb. All right, that's where water is reabsorbed. And on the ascending limb, on the other side here, water is not reabsorbed in that area, and more electrolytes are reabsorbed. And this is going to deal with dealing with our urine concentration, which we'll get to in a little bit. Next is our distal convoluted tubule and also the collecting duct. All right, so here, by the time we get here, only 10% of the sodium and chloride ions are left and 25% of the water. Whether more is reabsorbed is due to hormones. So when we secrete aldosterone, aldosterone is going to cause us to reabsorb more sodium ions. And so by reabsorbing more sodium ions, we reabsorb more water. Aldosterone also causes us to excrete more potassium ions. All right? So if no aldosterone is secreted, we lose about 2% of our sodium. All right? Next is atrial natriuretic hormone, and as I talked about that before, it has the opposite effects of aldosterone. It prevents us from reabsorbing more sodium. By getting rid of more sodium, we get rid of more water.